Okay, go ahead.
Hello, everyone. My name is Salvis Kaksoglu, and I'm the president of Hellenic Link Midwest. I would like to welcome you for today's talk by Professor and Deputy of the Greek Parliament, Dimitra Kairidis. We are fortunate to have him speak to us today. I think it will be very interesting and informative talk, and on the very important issue of Turkey's demands and provocations against Greece, and how much we can count on our allies in countering Turkish aggression. It is ironic that after 100 years from the tragic end of the Greek presence in Asia Minor in 1922, and the hopes of all that the exchange of populations between Greece and Turkey would bring a peaceful coexistence between the two countries, we're still dealing with Turkish expansionist agenda and provocations today. Dr. Kairidis is a member of the Greek Parliament representing Athens north of the center-right party of New Democracy. He's a vice chairman of the Committee on Legal Affairs and Human Rights of the Parliamentary Assembly of the Council of Europe and member of the delegation of the Hellenic Parliament to the Conference on the Future of Europe. He's a professor of international politics at Pantheon University of Athens and the founding director of the Navarino Network in Thessaloniki. He has taught at many universities in Greece and abroad, and he's a regular TV political commentator. He has published extensively on international politics, including books on nationalism and ethnic conflict, US policy, foreign policy, and Greek-Turkish relations. Dr. Kairidis, the screen is yours.
Right. Thank you very much. Thank you very much for the kind invitation. It's an honor and a joy to be with you and to have this chance to speak with each other.
Forget it.
There is an interruption there. The joy in particular is great for me because I've spent 12 years of my life in the United States, both as a graduate student and later working and teaching in Boston. So I relish every chance I have to get back to the amazing Greek diaspora in the United States and to have this conversation. And when the invitation came, I was very enthusiastic in accepting. And so here we are today on the 16th of January of the new year, 2022, with me recovering from COVID with very mild symptoms in my Athens home, and you all over the United States, mostly in Chicago. We have to discuss a topic that is very much on the headline news here in Greece, the Turkish aggression that has become more accentuated over the last years for a number of reasons that have to do with the overall geostrategic direction of Turkey and the geostrategic environment in the Eastern Mediterranean, with the disengagement of the United States that we've seen the previous decade, the crisis in the Arab world, and the continuous strategic reluctance, to put it mildly, of the Europeans that provides space for non-European powers, authoritarian internally and aggressive externally, to exploit this power vacuum and to project their influence much more forcefully than in the past. First and foremost among them, obviously, Turkey under President Erdogan. Let me start with one or two cardinal rules, as I call them, when teaching Greek foreign policy and international affairs in general to our students, that will provide an overall rubric of where we stand and where we are heading. The first cardinal rule comes from Greek foreign policy. After almost 200 years of independent existence, we can look back to what has been going on since 1830, when the modern Greek state was first established and recognized as independent, until recently. And I think for every student of Greek foreign policy, one thing becomes clear. Greece has succeeded whenever it has had allies on its side, great powers in particular, and it has failed whenever it has found itself isolated. So for whatever merit and value the Greek military is, it is very important to keep in mind that diplomacy has played an equally, if not more important role in the outcome of Greece's foreign projects. Whenever it was alone, like in 1922, as it was mentioned, this year is the centenary of the dark anniversary of the Asia Minor disaster, the biggest trauma of modern Hellenism, no doubt. Greece found itself alone, isolated in 1922, managed to reverse its position from a victor of First World War under Venizelos, reinstating the Germanophile king in 1920 and providing the context for being left alone by its undone allies, mainly Italy, France, and even Britain, and so it failed in Asia Minor. The same can be said a few years earlier in 1897 in the unfortunate Greek-Turkish war at the end of the 19th century, and obviously of 1974, when under the military dictatorship, again, Greece found itself internationally isolated, with its prestige and credibility in tatters by the dictatorial regime, and in a fight between the government in Athens and the deposed president of Cyprus, Makarios, at the time. This provided the opportunity for Turkey to proceed with what it had for long planned, the invasion and partition, de facto partition of Cyprus in July of 1974. On the contrary, when Greece has formed alliances, first and foremost during the Balkan Wars in 1912-1913, or during the First or Second World War, and obviously being part of a broader alliance during the Cold War, Greece found itself on the side of the victors, on the correct side of history, and enjoyed the benefits of that choice. I think this is a cardinal rule that informs and should continue informing Greek foreign policy and the formulators of Greek foreign policy. For sure, it's something that the current Prime Minister Kyriakos Mitsotakis has at heart, having himself studied Greek foreign policy very thoroughly, both through his upbringing in his family with his father, Konstantinos Mitsotakis, representing the reincarnation of the Venizelist realist tradition of Greek foreign policy, and through his studies in prestigious universities such as Harvard, where his thesis was devoted to Greek foreign policy. This is number one. The second rule that any student of international relations is taught from the very beginning is the fact that the international environment is an environment of great insecurity. It's an environment that lacks the strong domestic order, characterized, as the realists would say, by anarchy, in the sense that there is no superior authority for states to resort in case of aggression. And therefore, it is an environment where its units, the states, depend on what the realists call self-help. It's a system of self-help. You must depend on yourself. It's good to have alliances. It's good to share the burden with others, but you should not fantasize and entertain illusions that this would be enough at the critical moment, at the critical junction. Because very many times in international affairs, international treaties were broken, commitments were not honored, and at the end of the day, you can find yourself alone, and you have to be prepared to do what is needed yourself, rather than only depend on others to do it. So you have to be a realist, and you have to understand how the international game is played. So those are the two. They appear possibly contradictory. The one rule speaks of the value of alliances. The other rule tries to modify and keep us on the ground, not to become naive and carried away by promises that, in order to be honored at the end of the day, a number of things must always happen, and that in international affairs, signatures are not as valuable as they are in domestic affairs, where there are courts where you can take someone who breaks his contract and have the contract enforced. In international affairs, there is no such mechanism of enforcing those contracts, those treaties, those commitments. So this is the general framework. Let me come to where we stand today and put all this in practice. We have seen an increased desire and drive on the part of Turkey for becoming strategically more autonomous and more distant from Western planning. This is happening at an accelerating pace from the start of 2010, the decade of 2010, and increasingly so more recently. let me remind our audience that originally Tayyip Erdogan came in power as a reformer, as someone who was opposed to Turkish ultranationalism, as it was instrumentalized and used by the old Kemalist establishment of military officers, the judiciary, and the bureaucracy, the so-called deep state of Turkey, against which Erdogan first was elected and came to power. And he found in Turkey's European vocation, the first years, a useful ally to marginalize these Kemalists, the judges, the bureaucrats, and especially the military, in order for its people to rule unhindered Turkey. This was the first 10 years in power, between 2002 and 2000, I would say, 11. Things, however, started changing since. This change has to do with some very basic things and some on the ground, objective developments on the ground, but also with some policy choices. The objective things, facts on the ground, have to do with Turkey's growth. Turkey experienced a boom that was initiated by Erdogan's predecessor through the successful implementation of an IMF program. He took advantage of the work done previously, and he insisted, expanded, deepened, and continued to follow the planning that was put in place, so that Turkey's economy thrived the first years and tripled its GDP between the early 2000s and more recently. This provided Turkey with a certain self-confidence. It was no longer a beggar and a laggard. It was becoming an economic powerhouse of its own right, on its own right, in its region. And this compared even more favorably when juxtaposed with the disaster of its neighbors. The Arab world went into further decline and acute crisis after the Arab Spring. Iran, despite the ups and downs overall, did not have the economic performance that was expected, and has been under severe international sanctions. Most of its neighbors, including Greece, went backwards when Turkey thrust ahead. And this gave Ankara, again, a certain confidence to entertain some kind of megalomania. Then came the Arab Spring, and what happened in the region on the one hand, and what happened internally inside Turkey on the other. Erdogan, I don't want to go into the details, for a number of reasons, turned increasingly more authoritarian and espoused what he used to denounce, Turkey's ultra-nationalism, and allied himself with this political force MHP, the extreme right fascist party under Barzeli that was originated in the 60s, founded by Alparslan Turkes, a Turkish Cypriot, very radical, very extreme, with a paramilitary organization called Grey Wolves that terrorized Turkish leftists in the 1970s and was responsible for a number of murders, assassinations in those dark years. The fact that Erdogan has allied since 2015 his party and his power, his government with these forces is indicative of the U-turn and of the great changes for the worse that Turkey has made. And obviously the international environment changed dramatically with America becoming sick and tired of being involved in perennial wars in the Middle East. Obama started this disengagement from Iraq, recently completed with the disengagement from Afghanistan under Biden. The Arab Spring became an Arab winter and plugged many Arab states into civil wars, not only Iraq, but also Syria, Libya, Yemen, and potentially even Lebanon now, that further weakened the structures and provided more vacuums for outsiders to intervene, including Turkey. And Europe found itself, especially under Angela Merkel, even more hesitant and reluctant to project influence and power in its vicinity, self-absorbed first with the Euro crisis in the beginning of the decade and later with the refugee crisis after 2015, until Emmanuel Macron was elected in France in 2017, and some things started changing. 2016, the failed coup was a turning point for Erdogan. In the official mythology of the regime, this was a coup that originated by the dark force of Fethullah Gulen, his former ally, who, by the way, resides in Pennsylvania in exile, in self-imposed exile to be protected from Erdogan. And in Erdogan's mind and in the official narrative, it was the Americans who tried to get rid of Erdogan. Get rid of him not only politically, but even physically. And the process of disengaging from the West accelerated after that. It was facilitated by his condominium with Russia that he managed to establish through repeated contacts with Putin. I don't know two leaders that have met more often than Putin and Erdogan. And so Turkey started taking a distance from the West and from Western plans and interests and definitely values in this part of the world. This has provided, point number 4, an opportunity for Greek foreign policy to reposition itself as the reliable, credible ally of the West, even more than in the past, now that Turkey was becoming increasingly unreliable. And the West, mainly United States, has been very willing to go along as a guarantee, investing on Greece and Greece's geostrategic role and importance, investing on that as a guarantee and potential counterbalance to Turkey's further disengagement. Kyriakos Mitsotakis, during the last 2 years in power in Greece, has proved to be very, very energetic in exploiting and utilizing this opening created by Turkey's disengagement from the West, and he turned Greek foreign policy much more into a much more assertive, energetic style than what we were used to in the past and what the Turks were used to in the past, and therefore they were surprised to find out that the Greeks put up resistance in Evros during the attempt to break through in March of 2020 with the use of refugees and migrants. Erdogan was so confident that his exercise, his attempt will succeed, that he himself and his regime's representatives and the Turkish media had announced that 150,000 migrants had already breached into Greece, something that had never happened. And when they found out that the Greek army and the Greek police managed to contain the crisis, he was truly, truly surprised, as we know. The same happened with the crisis he initiated in the sea with Urus Reis in August of the same year, 2020. Instead of sending 1 or 2 Greek ships, as it was the case in the past, to encircle the Urus Reis, the exploration vessel, that was usually the Greek practice in the past. The whole Greek fleet was mobilized, sending a message that Greece is ready for whatever escalation Erdogan might choose, and sending a message of decisiveness the Turks were not fully prepared for. And of course, this Greek decisiveness found expressions in two more fronts, apart from what was happening on the ground, which was the most important. The one front was alliances, regional alliances. Greece moved very quickly to sign an agreement with Italy and later with Egypt for the exclusive economic zone and sea rights. and moved quickly to upgrade its relations with the Arabs, Israel, further, France, and the United States. Let me speak very briefly about those four, and then about the other front of weapon acquisition. The most important failure of Turkey's foreign policy the last 10 years has been, without a doubt, the rupture with Egypt. This is something that is admitted and widely believed in Ankara itself. It's not something that I alone say. Erdogan was very close to the Muslim Brothers that ruled for a year under Morsi before al-Sisi came to power in the summer of 2013. And he was not prepared for the change of government and change of direction of Egypt after that. And he continued to oppose al-Sisi and support the Muslim Brothers, putting Egypt against him squarely. And this was very important because under the Muslim Brothers, Egypt was ready to sign a sea agreement with Turkey that would have been very detrimental to Greek interests and Cypriot interests. And Egypt went reverse, so much so that it signed a few months ago an agreement not with Turkey, but with Greece. Even a partial agreement, not a full agreement, but nevertheless, it was the result of that Turkish-Egyptian conflict since 2013 that was further multiplied in Libya and elsewhere. Erdogan, for domestic reasons and also for his international agenda, trying to project himself as the leader of the oppressed, of the Muslim oppressed, of the Muslim underprivileged of the world, espoused the Palestinian cause with a ferocity that Turks were unaccustomed to. Turkey, during the Cold War, was very reluctant to be, though a majority Muslim country, very, very reluctant to be at the forefront of the struggle of the Palestinians and the radicalism that that struggle fed. Under Erdogan, all these hesitations went out, provoking the wrath of Israel, obviously, and of the Israeli lobby in Washington that has provided valuable support to the Greek cause as a result. Now, with France, things are equally interesting. France was shocked to find out Turkey against it in Libya, and to have French Navy assets being threatened by Turkey's Navy off the coast of Libya. But there is an even broader struggle, ideological, political, between Erdogan and Macron, because of Erdogan's Islamism. Now, I don't want to go deep into details and tire you, but Kemalism in its original inception was very much influenced by France and French secularism, strict, militant French secularism of a Jacobinian kind. And Erdogan's attempt to dismantle that Kemalist secularism is also an attempt that puts him in opposition to the originator of the model, that is ideologically France. Now, when France happened to be led by a very ambitious and assertive president, such as imperial almost, such as Emmanuel Macron, the conflict between the two was almost inevitable, and has moved France further towards Greece and Cyprus. Greek-French relations have traditionally been very close. From the very start of the Greek independence, France has played a crucial role in the Greek Revolution. The Greek Revolution happened to some degree because of the French Revolution and the Napoleonic upheavals that followed, that made the ship owners of the Greek islands rich by breaking the continental embargo, by providing all these new ideas that Napoleon spread throughout Europe into this corner of Europe, and so on and so forth. And we have fought on the same side with the French for most of our history. And after 1974 and the disappointment with Kissinger and American foreign policy on Cyprus, the French came and provided, under Giscard d'Estaing at the time, and since then, with weaponry and a strategic relationship to make Greece a little bit more independent from the disappointing United States, disappointing with what happened in 1974, in the summer of 1974. So the Greek-French relations is old, is not new, but it was renewed and further deepened because of what Turkey was doing in the area. And then there is America, where relations had improved all along the previous years and under the previous government as well, despite its self-proclaimed radicalism. The Cyprus government was careful enough to continue cultivating the relationship with the United States. And already under Pompeo, but even more with the new administration, things move the right direction. And a certain individual, Bob Menendez, the chairman of the Foreign Relations Committee in the Senate, has been very instrumental in giving flesh and substance to that improvement, with a number of legislative initiatives that we hadn't seen in the past. And so much so that the relationship has never been better and closer, on the one hand. And on the other hand, Turkey has been suffering under tremendous pressure from the United States, especially with the expulsion from the F-35 program. So there is a favorable regional and international environment favorable for Greek foreign policy. In a sense, Erdogan, by overplaying his hand, has created too many enemies and too many competitors that has helped Greece's counter-reaction to his aggression. And in that sense, he is a cynic might say, a gift to Greek diplomatic efforts. because with what he's doing in Syria, in Libya, in the Caucasus, in the Balkans, it's easy and much easier for sure compared to the past to blame Turkey and to convince foreigners, especially Europeans, for your own right. That does not mean that the problem is resolved, obviously, on the contrary. And this is why, going back to the second cardinal rule, Greece needs to invest on its own forces. In 3 days, on Wednesday, we are welcoming the first 6 Rafale airplanes in Tanagra outside Athens. They will dramatically upgrade the Greek Air Force capabilities. This is one of the most advanced planes in the world, equal to the very best. It does not have the stealth capability of F-35, but apart from that, is equal to, the experts say, to the very best. And it's a weapon that Turkey does not have. And we have the pilots that have been training for more than 6 months, almost a year now, in Bordeaux, in France. Greek pilots, 6 planes fully equipped with the most modern weaponry, from Meteor and Exocet missiles. And they will increase to 24 in the next 2 years, upgrading massively the Greek Air Force. And on top of that, obviously, there is the Bellara frigate project that was unlocked ingeniously by Mitsotakis in September during his personal meeting with Macron, exploiting an opening created through AUKUS and Australia, and bringing the Americans on our side as well, because this frigate program had become a Gordian knot for almost 15 years that had become impossible to resolve. And eventually it was resolved under the best possible conditions at a very favorable rate, a very favorable timeline, and a very favorable overall package. So this is where we stand. We continue to invest on our allies and alliances in the area, the Middle East, in Europe and in America. Obviously, the game has opened. It is no longer just the Aegean and the bilateral relationship. Turkey has gone to Africa, is going to Central Asia, has been active in the Balkans, is playing a game with Russia and Greece with its own resources, limited resources, but ingenuity, is countering this game as much as possible, but I would say very effectively, to the surprise of the Turks. We have a lot of work ahead of us, especially in Europe, I am worried about elections and certain political developments in Europe. It is a work in progress there. We have some promising signs, first signs from Berlin after many, many years of disappointment. And we have to see how things go in France, obviously, even in places like Italy. Europe has underperformed strategically, and Greece is one of those powers in Europe that want to help find an autonomous, strong geostrategic voice in defense of its own interests, not only values, in a very, very competitive world internationally these days. I don't want to go further. I think I spoke a lot. I don't know if you have been listening. Thank you for your patience. It's kind of strange to be speaking to a screen. I don't see, I cannot see you, but I am happy to respond to any questions if there are any. Sava.
Yes, thank you, Dr. Kairidis, for your excellent overview of the geostrategic, I guess, situation in Greece, between Greece and Turkey, the United States, Europe, and the other countries. And now we will go into the Q&A session, and I would like the audience or the viewers to go to the Q&A icon on their screen and write their questions. Mm-hmm. We have one question so far, and it says, what can Greek Americans and Philhellenes do to support Greece and Cyprus?
Right. And there are some questions on the chat as well. I will be responding to them all. The support of the Greek diaspora is very important, especially in an open, democratic, competitive political system such as the United States, where minorities well placed in key states can magnify their power and can exploit opportunities provided by the American political system. Obviously, some ethnic groups, some minorities, such as the Israeli lobby, have been more successful than others. But the Greek diaspora has been very instrumental in balancing Turkey's influence in Washington during the difficult years during the Cold War. And today it plays a fundamental role. I mean, you can see that in Bob Menendez, how important. He grew up with a Greek Cypriot. He knows the Cypriot problem very well. He was married to an Armenian. He knows Turkey and Turkey's history and policy. He has some very, very strong opinions about Turkey, and he has been very instrumental in counterbalancing Turkey's aggression. And we owe Bob Menendez, and not only other senators and other and many, many Greek American politicians, a great debt for their effort. We need a better coordination, sure, between Athens and our friends in Washington. We have a very good ambassador, a very energetic, smart, and street smart, not only smart in an intellectual way, woman, Alexandra Papadopoulou in Washington. She has not been able to flourish as much because of the coronavirus restrictions, but I know that, and we've seen that with the vote of this new law within the defense budget of Greek American cooperation. The situation is very, very promising. Yeah.
Thank you for your answer, Dr. Kairidis. The next question is, in 1996, during the Emea Crisis, Turkey occupied Greek territory. How do you think the Greek government should have responded? That's a tough one.
the Greek strategy has traditionally been and continues to be by all governments, sometimes better, sometimes worse executed, but the strategy overall to avoid the militarization, the unnecessary militarization of the conflict. The Emea crisis was a very unfortunate event that continues to cast a dark shadow over Greek-Turkish relations. There were some unfortunate gestures that led to that escalation. It was the time when a new government was coming into power in Athens and was not fully in control. I'm not trying to make excuses, but it is something that should never be repeated. Nevertheless, the provocation does not produce law. Το άδικο δεν παράγει δίκαιο που λέμε. Η παρανομία δεν παράγει νομιμότητα. The illegality does not produce legality. We need to be always alert to avoid such an incident happening again. But I'm not sure if the full escalation should have been the answer, if this is what Yannis is implying. One should be very careful with this kind of things and should not be carried away at the choosing of your enemy, but should be in control of events rather than being carried by events. It was a very sad affair.
Thank you, Dr. Kairidis. The next one is a four-part, at least four-part question, which
the first is about co-production. Yes, co-production.
I'm sorry. Yeah.
Yes, this is a legitimate question, and it is a legitimate argument that I hear very well. The Greek defense industry has been overall a disaster. I think we have to be sincere in our assessment. Karamanlis and Averov, after Cyprus tragedy in 1974, tried to build an indigenous defense industry. The Greek taxpayer has paid billions and billions of euros for it, but the final products have not been equal to the investment, to put it mildly, 40 years down the road. There are still small ships, torpedo boats that were ordered that were given to Greek shipyards to build back in 2001 and still have not been delivered. Obviously, we should do something about the Greek defense industry, and obviously we do need a defense industry in order to maintain first all this advanced weaponry, and also to participate in co-production. But there is a lot of things, many things that have to be done first. The reason for Rafale was that we needed them right away. After 12 years of no investment or very little investment in the Air Force and in the armed forces in general, the gaps and the needs were so big, and the aggression on the part of Turkey made the acquisition so urgent that the only way ahead, instead of waiting for 10, 20, 30 years, was to purchase them directly. And actually, most of those Rafales are already in use because we didn't have time to wait to build new ones. So this is the reason. And the same goes for Belara. The frigates, we want them, and we need to have them in 2025. The first one will arrive, which is extraordinarily fast. We have spent 15 years discussing, and now in less than 4 years, they will be delivered. If we were to involve Greek shipyards, it might delay the project by decades, unfortunately. But this does not mean that we don't have to do something about our domestic industry.
Dr. Kairidis, I'd like to skip the other questions by this gentleman, and so that we have time to look at the other questions, and then maybe if we have time, we can come back.
One question per participant, yes.
Yes. Let me see if I have the next one. Okay, how does China and Russian Mediterranean plans affect Greece, Cyprus security?
China is becoming increasingly present in this part of the world, but mostly economically. It has not yet flexed its geostrategic military muscle. It understands that this is an area under other countries' influence, let me put it this way. And China has focused mostly on investing, trading, cultivating economic relations, and not being too present on the security front. Russia is different. Russia is a big power with a historic presence in the Mediterranean and a historic interest in the Mediterranean. It has managed with very little effort and very little cost investment to exploit the power vacuum that America's partial withdrawal has created in places like Syria and even Libya. And so Russia is in the Eastern Mediterranean in ways that were unthinkable 10 years ago or 20 years ago, when Russia had to focus on its huge internal problems. Now, with Greece, the relationship that has been traditional, historic, and based on common religion has been strained, if you were to be frank, the last few years. It has to do with Greece's reaffirmation of its Western vocation. This new Greek-American security agreement and what the Americans are doing in Alexandrupolis is something the Russians are
not very happy about.
Not very happy about. And the thing that the signing of the Prespes agreement and bringing North Macedonia into NATO was also something they didn't like. So they don't like Alexandrupolis. They don't like NATO expansion in the Balkans. They didn't like at all the ecumenical patriarchate recognition of the autocephaly of the Ukrainian Orthodox Church. You don't have to know much about Russia and Russia's obsession with Ukraine, but you understand that this was a very sensitive issue in Moscow. So for a number of reasons, we have not seen eye to eye recently. Mitsotakis has tried to improve the relations, and he has visited Putin recently to give him a very clear message that we belong to the West firmly, but we are a country. We don't believe in Russophobia. We don't believe in anti-Russian hysteria like some Europeans do. We do want to have an open communication channel and to find an accommodation with Russia and Russia's legitimate interests in Europe and in the European architecture on the basis always of international law, inviolability of borders, etc., etc. So we are one of those Europeans that Russians should be happy to have as counterparts compared to the Poles and the people of the Baltic states and other East Europeans that are very, very hostile. Now, Cyprus is a different matter. Cyprus traditionally, because of Soviet Union and more recently Russia's support in the UN Security Council, Cyprus has been more sensitive, let me put it this way, to Russia's needs. There is a very strong Russian economic presence in the Republic of Cyprus, especially in Limassol, that has developed hugely the last 20 years through, to some degree, Russian money. And so there things are a bit more complicated, but I would need at least 1 hour to explain further the relationship. Let's go to the next question.
Next one there. Erdogan's party has recently seen some electoral setbacks. Does this portend a possibility of removal of Erdogan politically as opposed to a coup? And if Erdogan is removed, what would that present a better opportunity to Greece, for Greece, to find a closer understanding with the new Turkish regime?
Let me start with the latter and say out clear and loud, that the problem we have with Turkey, of Greece with Turkey, is not of Erdogan's making. It pre-existed Erdogan, and I'm afraid it will continue after Erdogan. And we should entertain no illusion that the removal of Erdogan from power will resolve the problem. Listening to the opposition, I despair. And I despair because most of the opposition is even more aggressive towards Greece than Erdogan. And the opposition accuses Erdogan of being soft, often accuses Erdogan of being soft on Greece. So I'm not sure that things will necessarily become better, although one wants always to hope. The truth of the matter is that there are no liberals of any meaningful size left in Turkey. All the alternatives, as far as Greece is concerned, are unappealing, to put it mildly. Now, Erdogan has managed to control the state after 20 years in power. I will be surprised if a coup succeeds where it failed in 2016. Coups overall are becoming obsolete. The way to turn authoritarian is no longer through tanks, but through other means, which Erdogan knows very well, is very capable of using. I think he's a very tough cookie. He has proven all his opponents wrong the previous 20 years, and everybody who has bet against him, he has lost his money. He has been there for 27 years now, since 1994, when he was first elected mayor of Constantinople, of Istanbul, and prime minister since early 2003, and presidents since 2014, and so on and so forth. So he has been in power more than Kemal Atatürk, and he has every intention of staying there. Obviously, he cannot stay there through open, fair elections. I have no doubt that this is not the case, that whenever elections happen, by 2023, the latest, there will be of very dubious legality. He has shown that he will use every mean with the previous mayoral contest in Istanbul, when he cancelled the election and had a rerun. So he doesn't stop on anything. And especially today, let me give the American now dimension. When he looks at some of the discussions in America with the contest you have there over the legitimacy of the presidential election of 2020, the Trump accusation, and the problems, he feels empowered and encouraged not to obey the rules. Unfortunately, the overall international environment, international climate is permissive to this kind of behavior in ways that 20 years ago it wasn't. These days, in places like Hungary or Poland, or even in Washington, unthinkable things are being contemplated, let me put it this way, that makes Erdogan, who was never a committed liberal to begin with. I mean, this is a poor kid from a poor neighborhood of Istanbul with migrant roots from Pondos, from Rize, who managed to climb to power through his talents and audacity. He's not a liberal intellectual to pontificate about the values of democracy. He's a tough guy, toughened in the street politics of Istanbul, and he will use every means not to return to his roots and to remain the king, the Sultan.
Very good. Let's move to the next question, if we may. You mentioned good relations with the US under Pompeo. However, I really think if Erdogan had invaded the Greek islands, ex-President Trump would have acquiesced. If you agree with this overview, has any damage due to ex-President Trump gone away?
Yes, I have been very, very critical of Trump and of Trump's foreign policy. And I was one of the very few who predicted the victory of Biden way before it happened in the Greek media. And to tell you the truth, I was kind of surprised to be attacked in social media by many Trump supporters here in Greece. I didn't expect to see Trump being popular in the Greek blogosphere, Greek cyber space, but he was. Greeks overall, however, were not sad to see Trump go, to put it mildly, for a number of reasons. He was more of a problem rather than a contributor to any solution. However, Pompeo, especially during his last year in office, he visited Greece in August, and he was the one, obviously he was forced by the Congress as well, to sign the first sanctions on Turkey, and I wanted to be fair to him. It's not only Biden, it's not only Menendez, it's not only Rubio and others in the Senate these days, but Pompeo, especially during the last months of Trump in power, took some steps that were commendable. But yes, Trump was not a very good president in his foreign policy, at least. And that's why most Europeans, with the exception of Orban and the exception of Putin and the exception of Erdogan, welcome Biden's election and welcome him physically as a messiah in NATO last June. However, what followed in Afghanistan and elsewhere has been quite disappointing, making most of Europeans think that there are some structural changes in US foreign policy, irrespective of personalities, that even if Biden speaks good and he speaks nice and he's not the Trump provocateur, nevertheless, overall, there is something new about American foreign policy that we should take into account, irrespective of personalities.
Thank you, Dr. Kairidis. The next question, I think, was answered already, specifically the part that says, I was wondering your thoughts on a post-Erdogan Turkish government and a possible rapprochement with Greece. I think you said that there's no hope, probably.
Well, I wouldn't go that far. I would say, listen, Greece has been extraordinarily supportive of Turkey's European vocation before, and no other EU member state was as supportive, and we try to persuade some of our European partners that have been very hostile to Turkey, like Austrians or even the French, in that regard, because we wanted to Europeanize Turkey and democratize Turkey, and we wanted a prosperous, democratic European Turkey as a neighbor. This is the best solution. And it's a pity that the Turks don't grab the opportunity. Greece is their best neighbor. If they look around in the Caucasus, in the Middle East, they don't find any country stable, prosperous, democratic, European, a bridge for them to the West, such as Greece. And it is a very missed opportunity for both people. And while we are very, very committed to defending our rights, we are also overall, not only Mitsotakis, but the vast majority of Greek political forces committed to a better coexistence between the two people, because we are bound to live next to each other, no matter what. We don't choose geography. Geography is a fact of life, and we have to adapt our policy. So we are here to stay, and they are there to stay. They are a big economy. They are a young society. They have tremendous potential that they waste with Erdogan's irresponsible policy choices. And we could do really good things if we could behave, because the problem has many, many details, but the fundamental basis of the conflict is if our relationship will be regulated on the basis of international law or on the basis of gunboat diplomacy. In Europe of 21st century, I think the answer should be obvious, but it's for Ankara really to decide.
Thank you, Dr. Kairidis. The next question is, how would you describe Greece's relationship with China and Russia today?
With China, there is a flourishing economic relationship based on shipping. It's something that most people don't realize. Greek ships, the Greek commercial fleet carries Chinese industrial products abroad and bring raw materials into China. And at the same time, the Greek ship owners are the best customers for Chinese shipyards. They provide $5 to $6 billion a year in new orders for building or repairing ships in China. So there is a mutually beneficial relationship between the Greek shipping industry and China. This is the main pillar of the relationship, and through that pillar, the Chinese came to the Greek port of Piraeus. Greek ship owners brought them to Athens during the Karamanlis premiership. Now, Greece, like many Europe, on top of that, there is no anti-Chinese economic protectionist feeling as you might find in other European countries, because Greece did not have an industry to be threatened by Chinese imports. Whereas elsewhere, China is seen as an economic competitor, in America for sure, but also in some European countries. In Greece, no, because the Chinese products don't necessarily replace Greek products, because Greece doesn't produce, unfortunately, many manufactured goods. Now, finally, Greece, like most Europeans, dread the moment when our American friends will push us to choose. Most Europeans don't want to choose, don't want to have to choose between China and America, between China and the West. They understand America's reservations and preoccupations with China, but they want to postpone the day of reckoning for the future. Now, with Russia, the relationship has been even more complicated historically. There is an overall Russophilia in the Greek people from the very start, but Greece always belonged to the West from the very start. So there was a elite people's divergence vis-a-vis Russia, whereas the Greek elites were Western oriented and moved Greece towards Britain and later on towards America. A big part of the Greek people was Russia sensitive because of orthodoxy, because of a number of reasons. Recently, Russia's stock has declined because of this Russia-Turkey's connection, although there are some constituents in Greece, especially in northern Greece, especially on the far right of the Greek political spectrum, in some parts of the Greek church, that remain Russia sensitive, let me put it this way.
The next question is, why does Russia oppose so strongly the US new base in Alexandrupolis?
Of course, one has to consider the history of Alexandrupolis. Alexandrupolis itself is a new city that was, and the famous symbol of the city, the lighthouse on the seaside, was built with Russia's help 100-something years ago. First of all, the Russians don't want any US base close to them, no matter where it is. And Alexandrupolis could be no exception. The second is that the Americans have some very big plans for Alexandrupolis to create a new Suda bay. If Suda is important for Eastern Mediterranean, Alexandrupolis will become important for Eastern Europe as a land corridor towards Bulgaria, Romania, and the rest of Eastern Europe, complementary and to replace, if need be, the Dardanelles and the sea lane through the Dardanelles and the Bosporus into the Black Sea. So the Americans, within their strategy of creating alternatives to Turkey's geostrategic importance, they have decided to invest in Greece in ways that are quite unusual these days, because they don't really invest in European assets. They tend to mostly focus on Asia these days and East Asia. But with Greece, they make an exception, and they are investing both in Suda, where they are upgrading the port facilities and the airport facilities, and in Alexandrupolis for the first time, and the corridor, both economic energy corridor and geostrategic corridor towards Bulgaria and Romania.
I have one question, Dr. Kairidis. Is there any basis in Turkey's demands for demilitarization of the Greek islands?
No, not whatsoever. It's hard to be a Turkish diplomat because usually you are under, you are the one being accused, and you are the one needing to provide, how do you say, apologumenos, to
defend, in other words.
To defend. When it comes to human rights, when it comes to the breach of the rule of law, when it comes to foreign aggression in Cyprus, in the Aegean, even the Turkish-Libyan agreement. I mean, anybody with a map can understand that, to put it mildly, this is an overreach that has nothing to do with logic, nothing to do with geography. So the Turks have always tried to found their counter-arguments to get away from the difficult position they are in. One counter argument is the refugees, because Turkey has 4 million refugees. It's mostly from Syria. It's an issue where they want to use it to embarrass the Europeans, to divide the Europeans, and to use some naive Europeans to score some points, that you accuse me of inhumanity, of being inhumane, but I am humanitarian, whereas you are the cruel ones, etc., by reversing reality. The same goes with Lausanne. Turkey has violated the Lausanne Treaty time and again. One can only look at the Greek community of Istanbul, Imbros and Tenedos, to understand how much Turkey has violated the Lausanne. And if we are to talk about the Lausanne, they should be certain that Greeks have a lot to say. They take some clauses of the Lausanne where they talk about the militarization under completely different positions. In the meantime, both Turkey and Greece have signed the UN Charter. We are members of the United Nations, and we have signed, obviously, the Charter of the United States, in which there is an explicit right for every state for self-defense. This right to self-defense became even more stronger, legitimate for Greece after the Turkish invasion of Cyprus in 1974, when Turkey invaded a neighboring country, violating its sovereignty against all resolutions of the United Nations, etc. So Greece is legitimately afraid of Turkey's repetition. On top of that, Turkey has a landing fleet stationed on its western coast, facing the Greek islands of the Eastern Aegean. So for a number of reasons, and these are arguments that have been made time and again, it's not a new issue. The demilitarization started already in the 70s when Karamanlis and Averov, during the first post-junta democratically elected government, fortified the islands further as a result of the Cyprus, the invasion of Cyprus.
Okay.
What is new is this new doctrine of the Turks. They say the following: the islands should be demilitarized. Because they are not demilitarized, they should not be Greek. They dispute the Greek sovereignty now over the islands because, in their logic, quote unquote, they were given under the condition of remaining demilitarized. The idea that Greek territory, Greek sovereignty is conditional is a monstrosity and shows the bad faith and the level of aggression. Because here we are not talking about rights over sea that need to be negotiated and agreed upon the way we did with Italy and Egypt, not even over islets, without wanting to underestimate it, what happened in Emea, but we are talking about something even more serious, about Greek territory inhabited by Greek people, given to Greece under international treaties, being within Greece for decades, having never been disputed the previous 100 years by Turkey, and then suddenly, 6 months ago, they signed and filed a letter, official letter, to the UN through their permanent representative, Sinirioglu, in New York, saying that according to their own interpretation, these islands should not be Greek, and we dispute their Greekness because they are militarized. I mean, this is
terrible.
A totally unacceptable argument. No matter what they say, the islands, because of their behavior, will be even more militarized and more fortified, and the Greeks will do, every Greek, not only this government, my government, but the governments that will come in the future, we all will do our patriotic duty.
One last question, Dr. Kairidis. It's the second question of the four-part that was mentioned earlier. Γιατί, I guess it's in Greek, γιατί στον αμυντικό τουλάχιστον τομέα, I guess why in the defense area of Greece there is no a super think tank of recognized personalities such as Dr. Mazis, Georgios Kalenderidis, Georgios Philis, and others. Is that something that you would like to answer?
Savas Kalenderidis, yes.
Savas, yes.
Yes, I know all of them, and I'm in touch with them, and we talk about them. There are think tanks in Greece, some better, some not as good. And there is a very vibrant dialogue and public debate on Turkey in Greece, some often of high quality, sometimes not of such high quality, but this is often the case in every democracy. There are the pluses, there are the minuses. But if I were to say something on the substance, the real substance of the question is this. There is an impression on the Greek side that we are not as smart and as consistent as long-term planning on our foreign policy as the Turks are. I don't want to go into the merits of that argument, that the Greek foreign policy has not been as good, as well informed as it should have been. I don't want to go into the merits. I will only say this. No matter what we think of Greek foreign policy, we Greeks think of our foreign policy, you should all be aware that the Turks, and not only the Turks, all our neighbors, but especially the Turks, think that the Greek foreign policy is the best in the world. And that the Greeks are very cunning, very competent, very effective diplomats, very well informed, whereas they are not, they themselves, the Turks. And that the Greeks manage always to persuade the West, always to persuade the French, the other Europeans, the Americans, through their combination of charm and cunningness, and I don't know what. So it is important to remember that for all our failures and problems, our opponents think very highly of us. And this is something to have in mind.
Okay, thank you. Unfortunately, someone wrote a question in the chat area of, and I was wondering if you willing to just answer that one last one. The question is, why is Erdogan ignoring the Turkish economy how can such an ambitious leader allow inflation to undermine his efforts? That is my latest, yeah.
I have wondered the same very often, because Erdogan's success, political success and political hegemony was based on his economic success, on the successful economic management of the economy the first years. He left the technocrats like Ali Babajan, follow the orthodox reformist economic policy, and Turkey's economy flourished. And Turkey's economy opened up to the world and to world competition and globalization. I would go a step further, better than the Greek economy, that was often very statist and introvert, and eventually went into bankruptcy in 2010. Things changed. It has to do with the fact that most of his advisors have left. He has surrounded himself with, it happens often with long-term leaders, autocratic leaders, authoritarian leaders. He has surrounded himself with, how do you call them, acolytes, yes men, with no spine, with no backbone. He has an overconfidence that he knows everything because he has been correct. He has managed to survive so many times that he thinks that he's unwinnable. You know, they tried to kill him in the coup, they failed. The Americans were against him, they failed, according to his narrative. So he's unbeatable. He knows everything. He's an Islamist. And as he grows old, he becomes more Islamist, more pious, more religious, not less. And as you know, in Islam, in Orthodox literary Islam, interest is bad. Interest is connected with tokoglyphia. Yeah, how do you call the word? Yeah, it's bad because it impoverishes the one who gets the loan, and it should be forbidden. So he has a religious Islamist intolerance towards high interest rates, and he has devised this economic theory of his own. The funny thing is that he finds economists, so-called economists, that go along with his nonsense because they want power, they want to be around, they want to be in the central bank, they want to be in the finance ministry, and they entertain his illusions that by lowering interest rates, inflation will come down.
Yeah.
And obviously, he wants to engineer a credit boom by lowering interest rates to provide cheap loans for the economy to move ahead after the pandemic. I mean, there is a populist. So there is an ideological element, there is a populist element, an instrumental element to use low interest rates to re-energize the economy within an environment where there are no much talent anymore, there is not much competence left anymore. Very many good Turks have left abroad, or they are in exile, or they are imprisoned, or they are afraid to speak, or they have gone private. And in the government, you see this deterioration over the years from the initial dream team, quote unquote, with Gül and Babacan and the others. Now it's the And the same goes in the army. All the English-speaking, NATO-trained military officers left or were imprisoned as American spies. So it's fascinating how this inward-looking introvert Turk of the interior is taking its revenge on the extrovert dynamic Turkey of the coastline, and Erdogan is now captive to this new and paranoid situation.
Well, thank you very much, Dr. Kairidis. I apologize to our viewers in case there's someone that wrote a question and we were unable to answer, but I think we have exhausted sufficient time to end the session today.
I hope you enjoyed it. I hope it was what you had in mind.
Oh, yes, very much. Thank you, everybody. Thank you and Happy New Year.
Happy New Year.
Dr. Kairidis, please stay on for a couple of minutes.
Okay.
Yeah. Stephanie,
yes, I'm going to
can you please